Does the idea of making your own homemade bread or even rolls fill you with dread? There is no reason to, and if you're looking to make some homemade bread or rolls, I've got the perfect solution for you here. This is my easy homemade bread, very similar to how I made my light biscuits. Just a few ingredients, minimal work, and you've got the smell of fresh baked bread filling your kitchen. So if you'd like to see how this is made, stick around because it's coming up next. Hello and welcome to my kitchen. My name is Roy. I'm a home cook, an amateur baker, and I'm here on this channel sharing recipes that have helped me to lose over 125 pounds, whether those recipes are mine or someone else's. Now today is one of mine, and it's for another bread or rolls. You can make it as either, and I will talk more about that later. But I've done my Native American pan fry bread, I've done Irish soda bread, I've done my light biscuits. This is similar to the light biscuits, but it gives you a loaf of bread or it gives you a dozen rolls, whichever way you want to make it. But if you've never made bread before, this is a very easy, you'll see as we go along. You can make your own bread at home. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process. We're not going to be using yeast, so there's no rising and things like that. This is what they call a quick bread because we're using baking powder and baking soda as the leaveners. Before I get into all of those details, let's go over the ingredients. Here I have some cooking spray. I have an 8x4 loaf pan if you're making it as a loaf. If you are making it as rolls, you'll want to use a sheet pan for that, and you will just coat it with cooking spray. Here I have 2 3/4 cup of flour. That's just regular all-purpose flour. Now, if you are using self-rising flour, which up here in the Northeast we don't typically have a lot of access to, then you could eliminate the baking powder, baking soda, and salt because those are all incorporated into self-rising flour. But I'm using plain flour, all-purpose flour, whatever you call it where you are. Here I have 1 can of seltzer, that's plain seltzer. You could use flavored, as I've mentioned in the biscuit recipe. You could use flavored seltzer. That is going to help to give us a little more rise and make this bread a little bit lighter. One thing that I always had problems with the 2-ingredient dough is how dense it got. It was often very firm. I wanted something a little more like the texture of bread. And if you've made my light biscuits before, and if you haven't, I'll card that up here. But if you've made the light biscuits before, then you know how light and airy they get. Plain seltzer works well, but you could honestly use a diet soda if you wanted to add a little bit of flavor to this, but we're going for just plain old bread. Here I have 1 cup of non-fat Greek yogurt. That's plain, no flavoring, but you could use a vanilla if you wanted. It would affect the bites and points because those are pointed and this is not. Now that is at room temperature because, as I always say, I want my ingredients to incorporate well together, and if they are at the same temperature, at room temperature, they come together more easily. If they're cold, it's a little more of a challenge to incorporate them. Not that you couldn't do it from cold, it's just better if they are at room temperature, especially when baking. Here I have 1/4 cup of almond milk, again that is at room temperature. Here I have 1 tablespoon of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, and 1 teaspoon of salt. I've mentioned in previous videos where I've used both baking powder and baking soda why I do that, and it's because if there's an acid in your baked good, in your whatever you're making, it will help to have a little baking soda as well as baking powder. And that is because the acid interferes with the rise of the baking powder. So if you have a little baking soda, as I've used this metaphor before, it's kind of like a student is over here distracting the teacher while the other students are over here getting something mischievous done. Except in this case, the mischievous part is giving our bread some rise, because the yogurt is going to be dealing with the baking soda and leave the baking powder alone so that it can give us more rise than we would get if we only use the baking powder. But those are all of the ingredients, not very many. This comes together very quickly. So let me shuffle a few things around and we will get started. First things first, we're going to mix together our flour with our baking powder, baking soda, and salt. Again, if you're using self-rising, you don't have to do this step. So in goes the baking powder, baking soda, salt, and just whisk that together just because you want the salt and the leaveners distributed evenly throughout here so you don't get pockets of salt or leavener in the bread once we mix it up. You want it well distributed. Now you could also sift this if you wanted, but I do the lazy man sifting, which is just putting it in a bowl and whisking it together. But if you want to sift it, that's fine. So that's incorporated. I'm going to move that aside for now. And I'm going to bring in a 4-cup measure. You don't have to do it in a 4-cup measure. I just find it easier to mix everything. I would try to do this in the bowl, but then I'd be afraid I'd have a spasm and splash stuff all over the place. So I'm going to add in my Greek yogurt and the almond milk, and we're going to whisk these two together. Now the reason I'm doing this before I add in any seltzer is because we don't want to mix too fiercely after the seltzer's added, because we want to save those bubbles. We want to have that seltzer help give us rise, and if we mix it too much, it'll just flatten out. So just whisk these two together. And this is the same process I did with the light biscuits. And if you've made those, you might be aware that I said to mix this with a fork or maybe even like a butter knife, so that way you're being gentle with it. If you can be very gentle with it, using a whisk is fine. Now the reason I did not open the seltzer earlier was because I didn't want the bubbles to dissipate. But we don't need this whole can. We just need 1/2 cup. So I'm going to pour that in here and then pour that right into our mixture. And I'll save the rest of this to make a little soda with one of my drink mixes. So it's not going to go to waste. But now we're going to gently mix this together so that we can combine all of these, but not disturb those bubbles too much. And it should come together fairly easily. So just 5-10 seconds is all you really need. You don't want to disturb that too much. So now I'm going to set that aside and bring in my flour mixture. And we're just going to pour in our wet mixture and scrape out anything that doesn't want to come out on its own. And now at this point, we're going to mix it together with a spatula. We want to be gentle with it. Again, we don't want to ruin too much of the bubble situation from the seltzer in there. So we're just going to gently fold that. That just means going against the edge underneath and flipping so that you are getting things moistened, but not working it too much. Once this comes mostly together, we are going to be a little more aggressive because, like with the biscuits, you need them on the counter. This, I'm going to basically knead it in the bowl just by pressing. All I'm doing is trying to get the flour hydrated. And I'll flip again, get some of that flour that may be stuck at the bottom on top, and just keep working this until it comes together. Now you could go in there with your hands. I don't find it necessary, but if you wanted, you could get in there and be a little more direct with the mixing, but you're just going to keep pressing, getting that all incorporated. Once it starts to come together, you kind of roll it over, get some of that flour from the bottom and press that in, and you can see it's becoming one big dough ball. That is exactly what we're looking for. And you just don't want to see any of the flour left behind. So that is basically what we're doing, is just getting this to all come together without having any flour left. And that's all we need to do. If you're doing the bread, then from here we'll just put it in the loaf pan. But I did want to show you, if you wanted to make them rolls, what I do is I bring in my scale Now you could try to portion this by eye, but I want to make sure my portions are accurate. So what I will do is put this on the scale, remove the dough ball, zero out the weight of the bowl, add this back in, and that's 837 grams. So then I'll ask my little friend Alexa over there how to divide that into 12. Typically, it comes out to between 65 and 70 grams. So it's coming up as 69.75, so about 70 grams. Depends on the moisture in the air. Today it's a bit rainy, so I think it's absorbed a little bit more. And then what I would do is zero this out again, remove some of the dough until I got to the weight I was looking for, and it will show negative whatever it is here, negative 58 right here. I would also have a little flour on hand to help roll those up, because what you want to do is once you weigh it out, roll it up, put it on the prepared baking sheet, and you'll have 12 evenly portioned rolls. But as I said, I'm not doing rolls, but I do need to wash my hands, so 1 second. So my hands are washed. I have my dough here. I'm just going to transfer this into my loaf pan here, 8x4 loaf pan. Now, if you did only have a 9x5, you could still make it. You would bake it a little shorter amount of time. You would also get shorter pieces, but it would still work. So now what we're going to do is just press this into our pan, get this out to the corners, and make this as even a loaf as we can. It will fill up as it rises, but I like to make sure it's evenly filling the pan. And I will also press a little bit in the center, because the center of the bread tends to rise up a little bit more. So if I press it down a little bit, it will rise up, but it'll be a little more level. It won't be exactly level, but it will be a little more so. And you could, if you wanted, put some seeds on it, sesame, poppy, what have you. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just making a plain old loaf of bread. Now I have my oven preheated to 375 degrees. This is going to go in for about 40 to 50 minutes. I'll start checking it around 30 to 35 minutes, just to make sure it's not browning too much. But mine usually takes about 48 minutes, somewhere around there. But I want to check it a little early, just to make sure I'm where I'm supposed to be. Now, if you were making rolls, you would do the rolls for 20 to 25 minutes at 375. But this will all be in the recipe. Don't worry about trying to remember it. So this is going into the oven for 40 to 50 minutes, and I'll be back with a delicious loaf of bread. And there we have it, my delicious loaf of bread. Now, when this comes out, you want to immediately turn this out onto a cooling rack to get that cooling. Bread is one of the things you don't want to leave in the pan. It's already built its structure. A lot of things like cupcakes, cakes, that kind of thing, you do want to leave in the pan for 5 to 10 minutes to let them firm up. Bread is not one of those. You want to take it out within 5 minutes, because what will happen is the steam from the bread will start to escape inside the pan and make this soft and moist. You don't want that. Now this went for about 45 minutes. You can tell when it's done. There are 2 ways that I usually do it. Is if you tap on it, you hear that thumping, sounds kind of hollow. That is one way, but a preferred way is to take its temperature. Bread will be done, or the rolls if you make rolls, in between 190 and 200. I usually go for 195 just to be a little on the safe side, but anywhere within that range tells you that your bread is done. And this got to 193, so I thought it was perfect time to take it out. Now, you want to wait until this cools completely before you cut into it, which is why I have over here some that I made previously. And I wanted to show you, first of all, the roll. You can see squishy, it's not hard, not solid. And I made these yesterday, and they are nice and fluffy on the inside. You can see they have a little give, soft and tender. That's what you're looking for. Now the same with the bread, is this is the last of the bread, but you can see it's got some spring to it. It's not firm, overly firm. And this is the size of a slice that I get. If you happen to be more skilled or have a better knife, you can probably make them a little thinner, make a few more servings out of this than I do. I do this as 12 servings, and that is the size that I get. You also want to make sure you're using a serrated knife, one with these little scallops in it. If you have a flat blade, it could still work, but it'd have to be very sharp. So this helps to saw through the bread without smushing it. Sometimes if you have a non-serrated blade, it will smush instead of going through, especially if it's a dull knife. Now we just need to let this cool down to room temperature. I have had it when it's still warm. The problem with warm bread is it's still holding on to a lot of the moisture inside that hasn't had a chance to cool down. So it can seem a little dense or gummy, but if you really want some hot bread, you can do that. I'm not saying I've never done it, but that's all there is to making your own fresh homemade bread. Nice and springy, definitely light. Now I did test putting it in the freezer and it froze fine. I froze slices, individual slices. The texture when it thaws out is slightly different, just like a smidge drier perhaps, but still delicious. And especially if you toast this up, it's delicious. I will also use these slices to make my French toast. And when I make French toast, if you've seen any of my videos where I do that, I do leave that out to get stale overnight or toast it a little bit because you want it a little drier so it soaks up the egg custard but doesn't fall apart when you try to put it onto the pan. But as I said, this makes 12 servings. Each of those servings is going to be 2 Better Balanced Bites Earl Blue Points. I'm on the Healthy Better Balanced plan, which is the equivalent to the old WW Blue plan, and that's around where their current plan is. Now, if you are following calories, the calories for one slice would be 115. And if you are following macros, the fat would be 0.3 grams. Saturated fat would be 0 grams. Protein would be 5 grams. Carbs would be 22.8 grams. Fiber would be 0.7 grams. And sugars would also be 0.7 grams. Not too bad for bread, especially delicious homemade bread. There's nothing like the smell of bread baking. And it does have a faintly sourdough flavor because of the non-fat Greek yogurt. The texture is great. I especially love the crunch on the crust. I'm a crust eater. I love crust. Anyone who cuts off your crust, send them my way. Now, if you want the recipe for this, it is of course going to be on the blog. I will link directly to that down below, as well as to the blog itself if you're looking for any of my recipes. I will also add the other breads that I've done in case you're looking for those. I'll have a bread playlist so you can get the light biscuits, the native pan-fried bread, the soda bread, and this one. Those will be all in that playlist if you are looking for any sort of breads. And I like to make my breads as easy as possible, so even those who have never made bread before won't have any problem at all. But I hope that you enjoyed this video and this recipe, and if you did, I would appreciate the usual: like, subscribe, comment, share, and hit that notification bell for the next time I upload any sort of video. Now, if you've been following my lives on Saturdays, I did say I would not be having a live this Saturday because we are taking care of some business elsewhere. So I will not be doing a live, but I will share my weigh-in on the Facebook group and on my community page here on YouTube. Now, as I said, the biscuits and my native pan-fried bread are in the cookbook, and if you're looking for that, it is linked down below. There is a direct link to that if you are in the US. If you are in another country, you will have to search recipes with Roy Cookbook on Amazon. And if you have any trouble finding it, just let me know. I have found it for other people on other countries' Amazon site, so let me know if you have any trouble. Also down below are my 2 stores, my Fourth Wall store, where you can get this lovely apron that actually ties in the front, so I don't have to struggle to tie it behind me, and my Zazzle store, where they have all sorts of other things. There are some aprons there as well. There are also planners and things like that, mugs. So check out my stores. If you can support the channel in that way, I would really appreciate it. Also down in the description box is my Amazon storefront. If you're looking for anything I've used, it could be there. And my social media is also down there, my Instagram and a few Facebook groups that I'm part of. So go check out that description box for all sorts of information. And now I'm going to wait patiently for this to cool to room temperature before I dig in. Or maybe I won't. I haven't quite decided yet. But I hope that you'll be making that decision for yourself very soon. So until next time, bye.
together.